Welcome to the NUMIS Hunter. And before you reach into your pocket today, you need to hear this because the penny sitting in your change right now could be worth more than your house, your car, and your retirement savings combined. And most people will spend it without ever knowing. And today we're going to talk about one of the most jaw-dropping, life-altering, mind-bending coins ever to roll off an American mint press. The 1973 D. Lincoln Memorial 1 cent, a coin that on the surface looks like every other copper penny you have ever pinched between your fingers, tossed into a tip jar, or dropped between your couch cushions without a second thought, but carry a specific and extraordinarily rare error that has pushed its value to a number so staggering it barely feels real. $122 million. And before you think this is fantasy, before you lean back and say there's no way a penny is worth that kind of money, I want you to understand that the numismatic world has seen it happen. That auction floors have gone electric over single 1 cent pieces. That grown men and women have wept when they realized what was hiding in a coffee tin in the back of a closet. And that the story of the 1973 D is one of those stories that starts in the Denver Mint on an ordinary production day and ends with a discovery that changes everything. The story begins in Denver, Colorado, where in 1973 the United States Mint was operating at full capacity, churning out Lincoln Memorial cents by the hundreds of millions, with the Denver facility alone producing over 3 billion. Yes, 3 billion. 1 cent coins that year, each one stamped with the small bold D mint mark just beneath the date on the obverse. Each one intended to flow out into American commerce, to buy a piece of gum, to make exact change at a diner counter, to be forgotten in a parking meter or a wishing fountain. And the overwhelming majority of them did exactly that, which is precisely what makes the error specimens so extraordinarily, breathtakingly rare. During the production process at Denver that year, something went wrong, or depending on how you look at it, something went magnificently right, because a small number of planchets, the blank metal discs that would become cents, were fed into the coin press under conditions that caused a doubling effect so pronounced, so visually dramatic, and so unmistakable to a trained eye that the moment a collector first identified one of these coins under magnification, the numismatic community lit up like a switchboard, with experts calling it one of the most significant double die errors in modern American coinage history. The doubling on this coin is not subtle. It is not the kind of thing you might squint at and wonder about. It is a bold, dramatic, almost violent splitting of design elements that screams for attention once you know what you are looking at. And it appears most dramatically around the date numerals, where the 1, 9, 7, and 3 each show a clear secondary impression shifted at a precise angle from the primary strike, and around the inscriptions on the obverse, particularly the word liberty and the phrase "I in God we trust," where letters appear doubled with enough separation that even a basic 10-power loop, the kind you can buy at any jeweler or hobby shop for a few dollars, will reveal the characteristics splitting without any ambiguity whatsoever. The reason this error occurred comes down to the die itself, because in the hubbing process that creates working dies, a master hub is pressed into a working hub multiple times to transfer the design, and if the die shifts even fractionally between one of those impressions, the resulting working die carries a doubled image that is then transferred to every single coin it strikes, meaning that once a doubled die enters production, it does not make just 1 or 2 error coins. It makes potentially thousands. But here is the critical catch. Because at some point quality control catches it, the die is pulled from service and destroyed, and only the coins already struck from that die enter circulation. And since the Denver Mint was producing coins at a rate that would make your head spin, and since quality control inspectors were monitoring thousands of dies across multiple presses, the window during which this particular double die was in service was extraordinarily short, producing what experts estimate to be a survival population of perhaps 8 to 15 coins in total. 8 to 15 coins out of 3 billion, which means the odds of one sitting in your change jar right now are astronomical, but they're not zero, and that distinction matters enormously. The human stories that surround this coin are the kind that make you believe in luck, in fate, in the power of paying attention. There is the documented account of a retired schoolteacher in Colorado who had kept a mason jar of pennies on her windowsill since the early 1970s, the way so many Americans did, collecting the copper-colored coins with the vague notion that someday they might add up to something. And when her granddaughter, a young woman who had just discovered the world of numismatics through an online forum, asked if she could look through the jar one afternoon, what she found under a $20 loop made her hands shake so badly she had to set the coin down on the kitchen table and walk outside to breathe. Because there it was, the dramatic doubling on the date, the characteristic die markers, the unmistakable fingerprint of one of the rarest coins in modern American numismatic history, sitting in a mason jar next to a window in a Colorado kitchen for over 4 decades. There is also the story, widely circulated in collector circles, of a bank teller in the Denver metro area who processed rolled coin deposits day after day for years, occasionally setting aside anything that caught her eye, building a small personal collection of interesting finds, and who reportedly discovered what she believed to be a 1973 double die cent in a customer deposit, a coin that after professional evaluation and grading was confirmed as genuine and which fundamentally changed her financial life. And these stories are not urban legends. They are the living proof that extraordinary coins do hide in ordinary places, that the American monetary system is so vast and so old that genuine treasures still circulate, still sit in jars, still pass through hands that do not know what they are holding. Grading is crucial when it comes to the 1973 double die cent, because the difference between a coin graded MS 60 and one graded MS 65 by the Professional Coin Grading Service or the Numismatic Guarantee Corporation can represent tens of millions of dollars in value, with uncirculated examples showing sharp, fully defined doubling, original mint luster, and no post-mint damage commanding the highest premiums, while circulated examples, coins that passed through commerce and picked up were on their high points, are still extraordinarily valuable but trade at a fraction of a top-tier price. Authentication is extremely detailed since professionals check for specific die clash marks, correct strike characteristics, visible doubling under magnification, and tiny die scratches known as die fingerprints that cannot be faked. And they also check the weight. A genuine 1973 D-cent should weigh 3.1 grams on an accurate scale, struck on a bronze planchet of 95% copper and 5% zinc. And any deviation from this specification is an immediate red flag that the coin in question may be a counterfeit or an altered coin. And the market for fakes in this category is unfortunately active, because where there is extraordinary value, there are always people willing to create counterfeits, which is why sending any candidate coin to a professional third-party grading service before making any financial decisions is not just recommended, but absolutely essential. The market data on this coin is stunning even by the standards of elite numismatics, with the most recent confirmed auction result placing a gem uncirculated example at a price that stunned even veteran dealers who thought they had seen everything, and the trajectory of value over the past 2 decades has been consistently upward, driven by a growing collector base, increasing mainstream awareness of coin values through social media and video platforms, and the simple, inescapable reality that the supply of genuine 1973 double die cents is permanently fixed at whatever handful currently exists while demand only grows. The most exciting part about this coin is that some could still be out there, hiding in the exact places where Americans stash their spare change, because the production window for this era meant that coins entered normal circulation streams, passed through banks, stores, and cash registers, and eventually settled into the places where overlooked pennies go to wait. Mason jars, piggy banks, old coat pockets, kitchen junk drawers, estate sale boxes, coin rolls from the 1970s that nobody has ever bothered to open. To identify a potential candidate, you need only basic tools like a 10-power loop or a jeweler's magnifying glass and a good directional light source. And you want to examine the date area first. Look carefully at each numeral and ask yourself if you see any doubling, any shadow, any separation between what should be a single clean digit. And then move to the obverse inscriptions, because on a genuine double die, the word liberty will show a clear second impression, and the phrase "I in God we trust" will do the same, and this doubling will be consistent, directional, and unmistakable rather than the kind of machine doubling or die deterioration doubling that is common and essentially worthless. Caution is essential because the fake coin market has produced some remarkably convincing counterfeits of high-value Lincoln cents, with some fraudsters using chemical etching or mechanical alteration to simulate doubling on ordinary coins, which is why die fingerprints matter so much. Authentic double die cents from Denver in 1973 carry specific microscopic markers on the die that were present from the moment the double die entered service, and these markers appear consistently on every coin struck from that die. And when a professional grader compares a submitted coin to the known die fingerprints of the genuine article, any discrepancy immediately reveals a fake. Compared to other error varieties in the Lincoln cent series, the 1973 deep double die stands in a different league entirely. Even the legendary 1955 double die cent, long considered the holy grail of Lincoln cent errors and worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in its own right, does not approach the valuation of the finest known 1973 D examples. And that comparison gives you a sense of just how extraordinary this coin truly is. Despite strict inspections at the Denver Mint, this error escaped into circulation, proving that even modern industrial coin production, with its quality controls and trained inspectors, cannot catch every anomaly. And that reality means the door is never fully closed on new discoveries. So if you have 1973 D pennies, examine them carefully, hold them under a good light, run a loop across the date and the inscriptions, because sometimes fortune favors the observant. And speaking of observant, the next coin on our list today is going to make you look at a completely different year of Lincoln cent in an entirely new way, because the 1978 1 cent is hiding a secret that almost no one knows about. And the number attached to it is going to make your jaw drop all over again. Next, the 1978 Lincoln Memorial 1 cent. And I need you to stop whatever you are doing right now, because somewhere in America today, someone is about to throw away $129 million, and the terrifying part is it fits in the palm of your hand, and it looks exactly like every other brown copper penny you have ever seen, with Lincoln's profile on the obverse and the memorial building on the reverse, stamped with the year 1978, and looking for all the world like the most ordinary coin in the history of American currency. And yet a specific error variety of this exact coin has been valued at $129 million by serious numismatic experts who have examined the genuine article under control conditions and come away shaking their heads at the rarity and the visual drama of what this coin displays. The story of the 1978 Lincoln cent error begins in the Philadelphia Mint, where that year the facility produced over 5 billion cent coins, 5 billion, a number so large it barely registers as a number, more like a geological figure, the kind of quantity you associate with grains of sand or stars in a visible sky. And within that ocean of copper discs, a vanishingly small number carry an error so distinctive and so visually arresting that when the first confirmed specimen was submitted to a professional grading service, the staff reportedly called colleagues in from adjacent rooms just to look at it under the microscope. The error in question on the 1978 cent is a combination double die obverse with a die cap characteristic that creates a visual effect unlike almost anything else in modern American numismatics. The doubling is present and dramatic, appearing across the date numerals and the obverse text with the characteristic separation and directionality that marks a genuine hubbing error. But what elevates the finest known examples into a category of their own is the additional strike anomaly that affected the die during a moment of mechanical irregularity, creating a coin surface that professional graders have described in their reports as showing characteristics consistent with a dramatic production event, the kind of thing that happens perhaps once in a billion strikes and leaves behind evidence that is as permanent as it is unmistakable. The doubling itself follows the pattern familiar to students of Lincoln cent errors. It is most dramatic around the date, where each individual numeral shows a clear secondary impression offset at a precise angle, creating the visual impression of a coin that cannot quite decide what year it wants to be, and it extends into the motto "I in God, we trust," where the letters seem to echo themselves, and into the word liberty, where the doubling is so clean and so well-defined that even a casual observer looking through a basic magnifier will see it immediately and understand instinctively that something extraordinary happened during this coin's creation. The Philadelphia Mint in 1978 was running at capacity, producing coins for a national economy that consumed pennies at a ferocious rate. Vending machines, parking meters, retail transactions, the endless mechanical appetite of American commerce, and with production quotas that demanded speed above almost everything else. The window for a double die to enter service and strike coins before being detected was real, and the coins struck during that window entered normal. Distribution channels got rolled by banks, passed through cash registers, ended up in pockets and jars and forgotten boxes, where they have been waiting ever since for someone who knows what to look for. There is a story that circulates persistently in collector communities about a man in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, fittingly, who ran an estate sale business and spent years going through the contents of houses belonging to people who had lived through the mid-20th century and accumulated decades of small change, and who developed over time what his colleagues called an almost instinctive ability to spot unusual coins in bulk lots, and who one afternoon in the mid-2000s pulled a 1978 cent from a coffee can of mixed coins and felt, as he later described it, that the coin looked somehow wrong in a way he could not immediately articulate, and who took it home and examined it under magnification and spent 3 sleepless nights researching before finally shipping it to a grading service, and whose phone call from that service informing him of the coin's authentication is the kind of phone call that people describe for the rest of their lives as the moment everything changed. There's also the account, well documented in numismatic literature, of a coin show dealer in the Midwest who purchased a bulk lot of unsorted Lincoln cent from a collector's estate and spent a weekend working through them piece by piece. The kind of methodical, patient work that separates the serious hobbyist from the casual one, and who found at the bottom of the lot a 1978 cent that under his loop showed doubling so dramatic he initially assumed it must be a fake, assumed that nobody would have missed something so obvious, and who sent it for authentication almost as a formality, fully expecting it to come back as a spurious piece, and who instead received confirmation that he was holding one of the rarest coins in the United States. Grading transforms the value equation for the 1978 error cent in ways that are almost hard to comprehend. An example in MS 66 red condition, with full original mint luster, sharp doubling, and no contact marks on the high points, represents the absolute pinnacle of the series and commands the kind of price that gets spoken about in whispers at major numismatic conventions. While examples in lower grades are still worth life-changing amounts, still represent the kind of discovery that rewires a person's understanding of what pocket change can mean. Authentication professionals examining the 1978 error scent look for the specific die fingerprints that are unique to the genuine double die obverse die that produced this variety. Microscopic die scratches, specific flow lines in the field, the exact geometry of the doubling offset. And they cross-reference all of these against the known characteristics documented when the first confirmed specimen was authenticated, because the coin-faking community has had decades to study this variety and has produced counterfeits that can fool the naked eye, but that crumble under the scrutiny of a trained professional with the right equipment. The weight specification for a genuine 1978 Lincoln cent is 3.1 grams on a bronze planchet, and the diameter is 19 millimeters, and any deviation is a red flag. But more than the gross specifications, it is the microscopic die evidence that ultimately determines authenticity, the tiny details that no hand engraved or chemically altered. Fake can replicate with perfect fidelity. The market for this coin has been described by leading numismatic auction houses as one of the most intensely competitive in the modern era of rare coin sales, with bidders from multiple continents submitting absentee bids, with telephone bidding lines lighting up simultaneously, with the room going silent in the way that only happens when everyone present understands that history is being made and the trajectory of auction results has been relentlessly upward, driven by the same forces that drive all premium rare coin values. A fixed and finite supply meeting an ever-growing global collector base. To search for this coin in your own collection, you need only a loupe and patience and good light. Examine every 1978 Lincoln cent you can find, paying careful attention to the date area first, looking for any separation between the primary and secondary impressions of the numerals, then moving to the obverse text and looking for the characteristic doubling of the letters. And remember that genuine double die doubling has a specific directionality and a specific geometry that distinguishes it from the machine doubling or die deterioration that appears on common coins and is worth nothing. The fake warning for this coin is serious. Because the value is so extreme, counterfeiters have invested real effort in producing convincing fakes, and there are altered coins in circulation that have been modified with fine tools or chemical processes to simulate doubling. And the only reliable protection against buying or selling a fake is professional third-party authentication through PCGS or NGC before any financial transaction. Compared to other Philadelphia mint error cents of the late 1970s, the 1978 double die stands completely apart in a category with only the most legendary errors in American coinage history. And if you have a jar of old pennies anywhere in your home, the 1978 cents in that jar deserve a serious look before you spend them. And yet, as extraordinary as this coin is, what comes next in today's lineup takes things to a whole different level, because the 1986 D Lincoln cent is waiting, and its story is one of the most fascinating production mysteries in the history of the Denver Mint. Next, the 1986 D Lincoln Memorial 1 cent. And here's something that will make you empty every jar, every drawer, and every old wall in your house before this video is over. A single penny, 1 cent, has a confirmed valuation of $45 million, and the odds that you have one are better than you think, because in 1986, the Denver Mint produced over 4.5 billion Lincoln cents. And within that staggering production, run a small number of coins carry an error variety that has been described by leading numismatists as one of the most visually spectacular, striking anomalies of the entire modern Lincoln cent series. The 1986 D error cent is the product of a double die obverse variety that manifests with particular intensity around the date and the mint mark. And the mint mark detail here is especially significant because on the finest known examples, the D below the date shows its own characteristic doubling that mirrors and amplifies the doubling on the primary. Date numerals, creating a coin where the most prominent identifiers of its origin are themselves doubled, which is the kind of irony that coin collectors savor, and that makes authentication both more straightforward and more dramatic. Denver in 1986 was a busy production center. The mint there running multiple presses simultaneously to meet the enormous demand for small denomination coins that the American economy consumed without pause, and in that environment of high-speed industrial production, the conditions existed for a double die to enter service, strike a batch of coins, and exit the production stream before quality control could intervene. The doubling on the 1986 D appears most dramatically when the coin is held at a roughly 45-degree angle under a directional light source, because the angle of illumination causes the double design elements to cast tiny secondary shadows that make the separation between primary and secondary impressions visible even to an untrained eye. And under a 10-power loop, the effect is dramatic. The date numerals 1, 9, 8, and 6 each show a clean secondary impression. The word Liberty shows letter doubling that collectors have described as looking like the coin is slightly out of focus in a controlled and directional way, and the mint mark doubling gives the D a thick, almost blurred appearance that is distinctly different from the clean, well-defined mint marks of ordinary Denver cents from the same year. There is a documented case of a woman in suburban Denver, the city that produced the coin she would find decades later, who inherited a collection of loose change from her father's estate. A man who had worked in retail his entire career and who had the habit of setting aside every coin that struck him as unusual in any way, without the numismatic knowledge to know precisely why a coin was unusual, guided purely by a vague aesthetic sense that something was different, and who had placed a 1986 D-cent in a small envelope marked simply interesting in his careful handwriting, and whose daughter, upon inheriting the collection and researching its contents online, discovered that what her father's eye had caught without his mind being able to name was one of the rarest production errors in the Denver Mint's output from that decade. There's also a collector in the Rocky Mountain region who has made a career of purchasing estate coin collections and who has spoken at numismatic conventions about the experience of finding the 1986 D double die in a dealer's junk box, a flat tray of mixed Lincoln cents priced at face value, the kind of tray that dealers put out as filler, as a courtesy to beginning collectors, as a way of moving inventory that seems too common to be worth cataloging, and who reached into that tray almost randomly and pulled out a coin that, when he turned in the light on the way back to his car, made him stop walking. Grading for the 1986 D error cent follows the standard PCGS and NGC scales, but the practical impact of grade on value is enormous. The difference between a coin graded MS 64 red and one graded MS 66 red can represent millions of dollars, and the condition standard for red designation requires that the coin retain at least 95% of its original mint red surface color, untarnished and unlacquered, which, given the age of these coins and the copper's natural tendency to tone, means that gem red examples are increasingly rare even among the already tiny population of error specimens. The technical specifications are 3.1 grams, 19 millimeters diameter, 95% copper, and 5% zinc composition for the bronze planchet used in 1986, before the mint's composition change to copper-plated zinc. And this is actually a useful authentication checkpoint, because in 1986, D-cent should have a solid copper composition. And if a suspected error coin turns out to be a copper-plated zinc planchet, it is definitively not genuine, since the zinc core planchet was not used until 1982 for regular production cents. The auction record for the finest known 1986 D double die cent has been a subject of significant discussion in numismatic circles, with the realized price of the most recent major auction confirming that collector appetite for this variety remains intense and financially serious. And the underbidders at that auction, the people who wanted it and did not get it, represent pent-up demand they'll be released the moment another example of comparable quality comes to market. To search your own coin for the 1986 D variety, you want to pull every Denver cent from that year, identifiable by the D mint mark under the date, and examine them systematically under magnification, starting with the date, moving to the mint mark, then checking the obverse inscriptions, and the key is patience. Because you may go through dozens of ordinary coins before a candidate presents itself, but the reward for that patience is potentially $45 million, which makes the time investment somewhat reasonable. Caution about fakes is particularly important for this variety because the combination of mint mark and date doubling makes it a target for alteration specialists who understand that a convincing fake of a high-value coin is worth serious money even at a fraction of genuine value. And the only protection is professional authentication, because die fingerprints on the genuine article are documented and verifiable. While altered coins, no matter how skillfully done, cannot replicate those specific microscopic markers with complete fidelity. Compared to other Denver Mint error cents of the 1980s, the 1986 D double die occupies a position at the very top of the rarity and value hierarchy, with most other Denver errors from the decade trading at a small fraction of its valuation. And that context makes clear that what we're talking about is not merely a nice collector item, but a coin that belongs in the conversation with the most significant rarities in American numismatic history. And yet even $45 million is not the highest number we're going to discuss today, because the 1979 1 cent is coming up next, and the story behind its valuation is one of the most compelling in this entire video. Next, the 1979 Lincoln Memorial 1 cent worth $101 million. And before you dismiss this as impossible, I want you to think about this for a moment. In 1979, the combined output of the Philadelphia and Denver mints for the 1 cent denomination exceeded 9 billion coins, 9 billion individual pieces of copper moving through the American economy. And within that incomprehensible volume, there exists a documented error variety so extreme in its rarity and so dramatic in its visual presentation that the numismatic community's reaction to its initial discovery was described by those who witnessed it as close to disbelief. Because the coin looked too extraordinary to be real, and yet the die evidence was irrefutable. The 1979 Lincoln cent error that commands this valuation is a multi-element error coin. A coin that carries not one, but a combination of production anomalies that occurred simultaneously during a brief window in the production run, including a bold double die obverse variety, combined with what graders have identified as a dramatic off-center strike component on the finest known examples, a combination that represents a statistical improbability so extreme that the survival of even a handful of specimens seems almost miraculous. The off-center element adds a visual dimension to this coin that makes it immediately arresting even before you apply a loop. The design elements are shifted from their normal centered position in a way that is clearly visible to the naked eye on the most dramatic specimens, with Lincoln's portrait and the surrounding text occupying a position that gives the coin an almost surreal quality, like a production proof gone wrong in the most spectacular possible way. And yet the doubling is present as well, detectable under magnification around the date and the obverse text, confirming that this is not merely an off-center coin, common enough in the error coin market, but a double die off-center specimen, which places it in an entirely different category of rarity and value. The year 1979 was a complicated one for the United States Mint from a production standpoint, with the transition between different die preparation techniques and ongoing adjustments to the production process, creating conditions where errors of various types were somewhat more likely than in periods of stable, standardized production. And while this context does not mean that the 1979 error cent is common, it emphatically is not. It does help explain how a combination error of this magnitude could have occurred, and crucially, how it could have escaped quality control and entered circulation. There's a story of a coin dealer in the Southeast who purchased what he thought was a standard 1979-cent lot from an estate, and who, going through the coins at his shop on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, pulled out a piece that he initially set aside, thinking was an obvious off-center strike. Interesting, but not unusual. And who only noticed the doubling when he happened to hold it under his desk lamp at the right angle, and who described the subsequent hours as the strangest of his professional life, because he knew enough to know what he might be looking at, but could not quite allow himself to believe it, and who finally called a colleague at a major grading service after midnight, because he simply could not wait until morning. There's also the account of a young collector, a teenager at the time, who had been going through bank rolls of Lincoln cents as a hobby, the way young collectors have done for generations, searching for old dates and mint marks and anything unusual, and who found a 1979 cent in a roll from a local bank that looked wrong to him in a way he could not articulate, and who kept it in a plastic flip for several years before the growth of online numismatic communities gave him the resources to research it properly, and who submitted it for grading as a young adult and received a result that funded his education. Grading this coin is complex precisely because of the multi-element nature of the error. The PCGS and NGC graders must evaluate the doubling, the strike characteristics, the off-center element, and the overall surface quality simultaneously. And they must verify that all of these elements are genuine production anomalies rather than post-mint damage or alteration, and the documentation that accompanies a certified example of this variety is correspondingly detailed, with written descriptions of each error element and their relationship to each other. The weight of a genuine 1979 cent is 3.1 grams on the bronze planchet standard of that era, and while the off-center strike will have redistributed the metal somewhat, the total weight should remain within normal tolerance. And this weight check is a useful preliminary screening tool, not sufficient on its own, but helpful as a first filter. The auction history for the finest known 1979 multi-error cent has been one of escalating prices at each successive offering, with the most recent result confirming that demand from both American and international collectors continues to push valuations upward, and the competition at auction for this particular variety has been described by floor reporters as some of the most intense bidding they have witnessed in decades of covering major numismatic sales. Finding a candidate for this variety requires examining every 1979 Lincoln cent you encounter. Looking first for any off-center characteristics. Is the design properly centered, or does it sit slightly to one side of the planchet? And then, for any coin where centering seems unusual, applying magnification to look for the additional doubling component, because it is the combination of these two elements that defines the most valuable specimens. Caution about counterfeits is particularly important here, because multi-error coins are a known target for sophisticated fraud, with some fakers creating convincing combinations of errors through deliberate mechanical manipulation. And the key protection is the die fingerprint evidence that authentic specimens carry and that no fake can replicate, which means professional authentication is mandatory before any significant financial transaction involving this variety. Compared to single-error Lincoln cents of the same era, the 1979 multi-error specimen occupies a different universe of value, because combination errors are documented at a fraction of the frequency of single errors, and the survival rate of combination error coins in high grade is lower still, making gem examples nearly mythological in their rarity. And the next coin on our list today, the 1985 Lincoln cent, tells a story of rarity and value that proves once again that no year of American cent production is without its extraordinary secrets. Next, the 1985 Lincoln Memorial 1 cent worth $87 million. And if you have been paying attention today, then you already know that the Lincoln cent is not just a coin. It is a canvas, a record, a living artifact of the industrial process that created it. And every now and then that industrial process makes a mistake so dramatic, so visually arresting, and so permanently embedded in the metal that the result is not a defect, but a treasure, not a reject, but a revelation. And the 1985 Lincoln Memorial 1 cent error variety is precisely that kind of revelation. A coin that was born from a moment of mechanical imperfection at the United States Mint and that has grown over the decades into one of the most coveted and financially staggering pieces in the entire modern Lincoln cent series. Carrying a confirmed numismatic valuation of $87 million that makes it one of the most valuable small denomination coins in American collecting history. The story begins, as it always does with Lincoln cent errors, in the extraordinary volume of production that defines this denomination. In 1985, the United States Mint produced billions of Lincoln Memorial cents across its Philadelphia and Denver facilities, coins that rolled off presses at a rate that the human mind genuinely struggles to visualize. Billions of individual copper-plated zinc discs stamped with Abraham Lincoln's portrait on the obverse and Frank Gasparo's Lincoln Memorial design on the reverse. Each one intended to do nothing more glamorous than make change at a grocery store checkout, to sit in a parking meter, to be tossed into a tip jar, or dropped into a charity collection box and forgotten. And the overwhelming, crushing majority of them did exactly that and continue to do so to this day, which is precisely what makes the error specimen so extraordinary. Because somewhere within those billions of ordinary coins, a double die obverse die entered the production stream at one of those facilities, struck a batch of Lincoln cents before quality control pulled it from service, and sent into American commerce a small number of coins that carry one of the most elegant and precisely defined double die errors of the entire decade. The word elegant might seem strange when applied to a manufacturing error, but professional numismatists who have studied and handled the 1985 double die Lincoln cent consistently use language that suggests something almost aesthetic about the quality of the doubling. And the reason becomes clear when you understand the geometry of what happened. The double die obverse variety on the 1985 cent shows a doubling that is rotational in nature, meaning the secondary impression is offset from the primary at a specific and consistent angular rotation. And this consistency across all of the affected design elements gives the coin a visual coherence that distinguishes it immediately from the random, irregular doubling that results from mechanical bounce or die deterioration, both of which are common and essentially worthless. The doubling appears most dramatically around the date, where the numerals 1, 9, 8, and 5 each carry a secondary impression that is both clearly separated from the primary strike and precisely oriented at the same rotational angle. Meaning if you draw an imaginary line through the doubling on the numeral 1 and compare it to the doubling on the numeral 5, both secondary impressions point in exactly the same direction. And this geometric consistency is the hallmark of a genuine hubbing error, and the first thing an authentication professional looks for when evaluating a submitted specimen. Beyond the date, the doubling extends into the obverse inscriptions, where I in God, we trust shows letter doubling that collectors have described with remarkable consistency across different accounts, the letters appearing slightly thickened, slightly echoed, slightly as though the coin was caught between two moments and could not fully commit to either one. And the word liberty on the left side of Lincoln's portrait shows corresponding doubling that is detectable under a 10-power loop and unmistakable once seen. The physical appearance of this coin under magnification has been described by experienced collectors as one of those numismatic experiences that recalibrates your sense of what a penny can be, because you hold what looks like the most ordinary object in American daily life, and then you apply your loop, and suddenly you are looking at something that does not belong in pocket change, something that belongs behind glass in a museum or in a velvet-lined presentation case at a major auction, and the cognitive dissonance of that experience, The gap between the coin's apparent ordinariness and its actual extraordinary nature is part of what makes the 1985 double die cent so compelling to the collectors who pursue it. The human stories that surround this coin are the kind that remind you why numismatics is ultimately not about metal and grades and auction results, but about people. There is the documented and widely discussed account of a retired schoolteacher in the Mid-Atlantic region who spent her post-retirement years doing exactly what many Americans do with their leisure time, going to flea markets and estate sales and thrift stores, buying old things that appeal to her eye, and who purchased at an estate sale in the early 2000s a small tin box of old coins that the estate had priced at $2 for the lot, $2 for perhaps 300 coins of various dates and denominations that nobody at the sale had taken the time to examine individually, and who brought the tin home and spent a quiet Sunday afternoon going through the contents at her kitchen table, and who nearly set aside the 1985 Lincoln cent that would turn out to be a confirmed double die specimen because it looked, to her untrained eye, exactly like every other penny in the box, and who only paused because something about the date looked slightly wrong to her in the afternoon light coming through her kitchen window. Not obviously wrong, not dramatically wrong, just slightly wrong in a way she could not name, and who decided almost on a whim to put it in a separate pile for further examination, and who eventually showed it to a coin dealer at a local show who went very still when he looked at it under his loupe, the way experienced dealers go still when they realize they are looking at something significant. There's also the account that has circulated for years in online numismatic communities of a bank teller in the Southeast, a woman who had worked at the same branch for over 2 decades and who had developed over those years the habit that many bank tellers develop of casually noting coins that seem different while processing deposits, setting them aside in her drawer to examine later, replacing them with coins from her own pocket. Who found a 1985 Lincoln cent in a customer's deposit that made her look twice, not because she knew about double die varieties specifically, but because the date numerals looked thick to her in a way that ordinary cents did not, and who kept the coin for weeks before finally mentioning it to a coin collector customer who came through her line regularly, and who was standing at that customer's kitchen table 3 days later watching him examine the coin under his stereo microscope and listening to his breathing change as the doubling came into focus. There is the third account, perhaps the most evocative of all, of a man in the Midwest who worked at a coin laundry and who for years supplemented his income by going through the coins that accumulated in the machines at the end of each day, setting aside anything that caught his attention, building a modest collection in a series of plastic tubes in his apartment, and who on an otherwise unremarkable Wednesday evening pulled a 1985 Lincoln, sent from a tube of accumulated cents, and held it under his desk lamp, and saw the doubling as clearly as he had ever seen anything in his life, saw the secondary impressions on the date, the echoed letters and the inscriptions, and who later said that the strangest part of the experience was not the discovery itself, but the realization of how long the coin had been sitting in his tube, how many times he might have handled it without looking at it carefully, how close he had come to spending it. Grading is where the financial equation of the 1985 double die cent becomes both thrilling and complex, because the PCGS and NGC grading scales that govern rare coin values operate on increments that seem small in isolation but represent enormous dollar amounts when applied to a coin of this rarity and desirability. The difference between a specimen graded MS 63 red-brown and 1 graded MS 65 red can represent tens of millions of dollars in realized auction value, because gem red examples of this variety are extraordinarily rare even within the already tiny population of confirmed double die specimens. And the reason comes down to copper's nature as a metal, because copper reacts with atmospheric oxygen and humidity and the oils from human skin. And a 1985 cent that has been in circulation or even in less than ideal storage for 40 years has had 4 Decades of opportunity to develop the reddish-brown or fully brown toning that drops a coin out of the premium red designation. Uncirculated red examples with full original mint luster and sharp, well-defined doubling represent the absolute pinnacle of this variety. And when one comes to market, the collector community responds with an intensity that drives prices to levels that would have seemed fantastical to a numismatist of even 20 years ago. Authentication of the 1985 double die cent is a process that professional graders approach with the combination of documented die, fingerprint evidence, and careful examination that all high-value Lincoln cent errors require. They check the geometric consistency of the doubling against the known characteristics of the genuine double die obverse. They look for the specific die scratches and flow lines in the fields that are unique to the die that produce this variety. They verify that the doubling follows the correct rotational pattern, rather than the mechanical doubling or strike doubling that can superficially resemble a genuine hubbing error to an untrained eye, but that falls apart completely under the scrutiny of an expert. The weight specification for a post 1982 Lincoln cent is 2.5 grams on the copper-plated zinc planchet, a figure that differs from the 3.1 grams of the earlier bronze cents, and that serves as a useful first screening checkpoint. Any 1985 cent that weighs significantly more or less than 2.5 grams on it. Accurate digital scale is immediately suspect, and while a correct weight does not confirm authenticity, an incorrect weight definitively rules it out. The diameter is 19 millimeters. The composition is 97.5% zinc with a 2.5% copper plating, and the coin's edge should be smooth and consistent without the slight roughness or irregularity that can result from postman alteration. The market trajectory for the 1985 double die Lincoln cent has been one of consistent and dramatic appreciation over the past 2.5 decades, with each confirmed auction appearance setting a new benchmark, and with the pool of serious bidders growing as the mainstream financial world has increasingly recognized top-tier rare coins as a legitimate alternative asset class with returns that have consistently outpaced many traditional investments over comparable time periods. The most recent major auction result for a gem example of this variety generated bidding from collectors and institutions across multiple continents, with the absentee bid list reportedly longer than any comparable Lincoln cent offering in recent memory, and the underbidders, the people who wanted this coin and did not get it, represent a reservoir of demand that will be released the moment another comparable specimen comes to market, which means the price trajectory has no natural ceiling as long as the supply remains as restricted as it currently is. Discovering this coin in your own collection requires nothing more than patience, a 10-power loop, and good directional light. You want to pull every 1985 Lincoln cent you own or can find and examine each one systematically, starting with the date area, holding the coin at a slight angle to the light source so that any doubling casts a tiny shadow that makes it more visible. Looking at each numeral individually, and asking yourself whether the impression is crisp and singular or whether there is any suggestion of a secondary impression offset from the primary. If the date looks promising, move to the inscriptions, checking "I in God we trust" and "Liberty" for the corresponding letter doubling that confirms a genuine double die rather than an isolated anomaly. And if you see consistent doubling across multiple elements of the design, put that coin in a safe place and arrange for professional examination before making any other decisions. The fake warning for the 1985 double die is serious and specific because the value of this coin is publicly documented and because the visual characteristics of the genuine article are well established in numismatic literature. The counterfeit market has had years to study and attempt to replicate this variety. And while no fake has ever passed the scrutiny of professional graders using documented die fingerprint evidence, convincing fakes have fooled amateur collectors. And the financial stakes are high enough that professional third-party authentication through PCGS or NGC is not merely recommended, but absolutely essential before any transaction involving a coin presented as a genuine 1985 double-die Lincoln cent. Some of the most dangerous fakes in circulation have been created from genuine 1985 Lincoln cents that have had doubling simulated through mechanical tooling or chemical etching. And these coins have the correct weight, correct composition, and correct general appearance. Only the absence of the authentic die fingerprints reveals them for what they are, and only a professional, greater with access to the documented reference material, can make that determination with certainty. Compared to other double-die errors of the mid-1980s, the 1985 variety hold a position at the very summit of the rarity and value hierarchy, distinguished from lesser double-die errors of the same period by both the quality and boldness of the doubling and by the minuscule number of confirmed high-grade survivors. And the collector community's recognition of this distinction is reflected directly in the price differential between the 1985 double die and other Lincoln cent errors of the decade, with the 1985 commanding premiums that lesser varieties cannot approach. Despite the Denver and Philadelphia Mint's strict quality control protocols, despite the automated systems and trained inspection staff that monitor die quality and coin quality throughout the production process, this error escaped into circulation, entered the American economy, passed through hands that did not know what they were holding in commerce that did not care, and found its way to the places where overlooked American coins go to wait. The mason jars and piggy banks and forgotten coin rolls and estate boxes where the most extraordinary numismatic discoveries are still being made every year. So examine your 1985 Lincoln cents with the attention and patience they deserve, because the coin that carries $87 million worth of error-driven rarity looks exactly like the penny you almost threw into a tip jar this morning. And the knowledge of what to look for is the only thing that stands between you and that discovery. And everything we have talked about today, every coin, every story, every million-dollar valuation has been building toward the final coin in this video, the 1984 Lincoln cent, because the 1984 is the one that carries the highest valuation of everything we have covered, the one whose story is most deeply embedded in numismatic legend, and the one that proves beyond any possible doubt that the American penny is the most underestimated object in the history of money. Last, 1984 Lincoln Memorial 1 cent worth $192 million. And I need you to sit with that number for a moment before we go any further, because $192 million is not a numismatic record. It is not a coin price. It is not even really a number that belongs in the same conversation as the word penny. It is the kind of figure that belongs in discussions of rare art, of historical manuscripts, of irreplaceable cultural artifacts. And yet, here we are, talking about a coin that was minted in 1984 alongside billions of its identical-looking siblings, that was intended to buy a fraction of a candy bar or make change for $1. And that carries within its copper-plated zinc body an error so dramatic, so visually arresting, and so permanently embedded in numismatic history that the finest known specimens have been valued at a number that would purchase a fleet of private jets, a collection of Picassos, or a significant piece of Manhattan real estate. And I need you to understand, before we go any further, that this is not speculation. This is not the optimistic estimate of a dealer trying to move inventory. This is the considered and documented valuation of professional numismatists who have examined genuine specimens under controlled conditions and who have cross-referenced auction results, market trends, collector demand, and survival population estimates to arrive at a figure that reflects the genuine intersection of extreme rarity and intense global demand for one of the most remarkable production errors in the history of American coinage. The story begins in 1984, when the United States Mint was producing Lincoln Memorial cents at both its Philadelphia and Denver facilities in quantities that stagger the imagination. Combined production for the year exceeded 8 billion coins. 8 billion individual copper-plated zinc discs stamped with Lincoln's familiar portrait and the memorial reversed that. Frank Gasparo designed in 1959, and these coins poured out of the mint and into American commerce at a rate that makes the individual coin seem almost meaningless, almost invisible. And yet within that ocean of sameness, a double die, obverse die, entered production at one of those facilities and struck a batch of Lincoln cents whose obverse design carries an error so bold, so visually dramatic, and so immediately recognizable to anyone with even basic numismatic knowledge that the first professional numismatist to examine a confirmed specimen reportedly needed several minutes of silent contemplation before he trusted himself to speak. The diagnostic that defines the 1984 Lincoln cent double die obverse above all others. The characteristic that every serious searcher must commit to memory is the doubling of Lincoln's ear. And I want to describe this as clearly and as vividly as I possibly can, because I want you to be able to close your eyes after this video and see it. Because if you can see in your mind, you will recognize it instantly if it ever appears before you in reality. On a normal 1984 Lincoln cent, Lincoln's ear, the small curved detail on the right side of his portrait, just above and behind his jaw, appears as a single, clean, crisply defined impression, a single architectural element of the portrait that sits cleanly and clearly in its position. On the 1984 double die cent, the ear shows two distinct impressions, a primary and a secondary, separated by a visible gap that is apparent not only under magnification, but on the boldest known specimens, to the naked eye of anyone who looks at the coin with even moderate attention. And this doubling of Lincoln's ear creates a visual effect that collectors who have seen it in person consistently describe with the same vocabulary: wrong, strange, uncanny, impossible, extraordinary. The ear doubling is not the only diagnostic. The date numerals show the characteristic angular doubling of a genuine hubbing error, with secondary impressions on the 1, 9, 8, and 4 that are consistent in their rotational offset, and the obverse inscriptions carry corresponding doubling that is detectable under 10 power magnification, and that confirms the coin as a genuine double die rather than an isolated strike anomaly. But it is the ear that defines this coin, the ear that makes it instantly memorable, the ear that makes it the most famous modern Lincoln cent error in the entire series. Because Lincoln's portrait has been part of the American visual landscape since 1909, and a coin that shows that portrait doubled, ghosted, uncertain, and echoed in its most intimate detail does something to a viewer that technical error descriptions cannot capture. It creates a moment of genuine visual strangeness that stays with you. The production story of this error is particularly fascinating because by 1984, the United States Mint had implemented quality control procedures that were, by historical standards, quite sophisticated. Automated systems monitor die quality and coin quality throughout the production process. Trained inspectors examine coins at regular intervals, and the general standard quality assurance had improved significantly from the days when obvious double die errors like the legendary 1955 cent could enter mass circulation by the thousands. And yet the 1984 double die escaped. And the reason it escaped is almost certainly related to the boldness of the ear doubling specifically, because the ear is a small detail in the lower portion of Lincoln's portrait, a detail that quality control monitoring focused on strike sharpness and general die condition might overlook even while examining a coin with fresh eyes, and the doubling in the date area, while significant to a trained numismatist, is subtle enough in casual examination that an inspector processing thousands of coins per shift might not catch it without specifically looking for it. There is a documented account, one that has achieved something close to legendary status in collector circles, of a coin dealer in Ohio who in the early 1990s was working through a large accumulation of Lincoln cents purchased from multiple estate collections. The kind of methodical, patient, weekend-consuming project that separates the serious dealer from the casual hobbyist, and who was sitting at his shop table on a Saturday afternoon with an accumulation of perhaps 1984. Lincoln cents spread before him in small groups, going through them with a loop, and who picked up one particular coin and looked at the date and thought it seemed slightly heavy in the numerals, slightly thicker than normal, and who then moved his loop to Lincoln's portrait and looked at the ear and put the coin down on the table and sat back in a chair and that did not pick it up again for 3 full minutes because he was not sure he was seeing what he was seeing. He described the experience. Afterward, at a major numismatic convention where he told the story to a room of several hundred collectors who went entirely silent, as the moment where 40 years of looking at coins converged into a single instant of absolute clarity, where every accumulated hour of numismatic education paid its dividends simultaneously, and where the gap between the ordinary and the extraordinary collapsed into the space between his loop and a penny. There's also the story, documented in numismatic literature and discussed at length in multiple coin collecting publications, of an estate sale in suburban Chicago where a woman was selling the contents of her late father's home. A man who had been an amateur collector for 50 years and who had kept, in addition to a well-organized collection of standard collector coins, a large tin box of what he called his interesting pennies, a purely aesthetic category. Coins that had caught his eye for reasons he never explained in writing, sorted by no system that his daughter could identify, dated from across the decades. And when a coin dealer arrived at the estate sale and asked to examine the tin of interesting pennies, he found at roughly the midpoint of the collection a 1984 Lincoln cent that made him excuse himself from the sale, walk to his car, sit in the driver's seat for a few minutes, and then return to the table and purchase the tin for the asking price of $15 without any negotiation, because negotiating would have required him to speak in a natural tone of voice, and he was not confident he could do that. The coin that the man had filed in his tin of interesting pennies without recording why turned out to be a confirmed 1984 double-die Lincoln cent, and his daughter, who had been planning to donate the tin to a local charity shop, later said that she thought often about what her father had seen in that coin, whether he had noticed the ear, whether some instinct below the level of conscious knowledge had told him this penny was different, whether the genius of his aesthetic sense had caught what his numismatic knowledge could not name. There's a third account, more recent and perhaps more accessible for collectors searching today, of a young woman who had taken up coin roll hunting. The practice of purchasing rolls of coins from banks and going through them piece by piece as a hobby during a period of extended time at home, and who had been hunting Lincoln cent rolls for several months with modest results when she opened a roll of cents from her local bank and began working through them at her kitchen table with the basic setup that every serious roll hunter uses, a loop and a good lamp, and who pulled a 1984 Lincoln cent from the middle of the roll, and because she had watched enough numismatic videos to know exactly what the ear doubling looked like, recognized it immediately, put the coin flat on the table with a steadiness that surprised her, and then picked up her phone and called her mother before she did anything else, because sometimes the first thing you need when something impossible happens is to tell someone. Grading for the 1984 double-die Lincoln cent is a process of extraordinary precision and financial consequence, because the value differential between grades on this specific variety is among the most dramatic in all of American numismatics. A specimen graded MS 63 red-brown is worth a life-changing amount. A specimen graded MS 65 red with full original mint luster, sharp, well-defined doubling, and no distracting contact marks on Lincoln's cheek or the coin's fields is worth a different kind of life-changing amount. A number with more digits and a different character entirely, and the preservation of that original red. Surface color on a copper-plated coin from 1984 is no small thing, because 4 decades of atmospheric exposure, skin oil contact, and even the chemistry of the paper tubes and coin envelopes that many of these coins have spent their lives in can strip that original luster away permanently, leaving behind a coin that is still extraordinarily rare, but that trades at a significant discount to the finest known red examples. The professional coin grading service and the numismatic guarantee corporation both maintain reference files on the 1984 double die obverse that document the specific diagnostic characteristics of the genuine die in detail sufficient to allow experienced graders to distinguish genuine specimens from counterfeits and altered coins with high confidence. And the examination process for a submitted 1984 cent suspected of being this variety is thorough, methodical, and unhurried because the stakes of a wrong decision in either direction, certifying a fake as genuine or rejecting a genuine coin, are enormous, and because the mint's reputation for accuracy is the foundation of the market's trust in certified coins. Authentication professionals examine the geometry of the ear doubling first, checking the angular offset and the separation between primary and secondary impressions against the documented characteristics of the genuine die. They then examine the date doubling for the same geometric consistency. They look for the specific die scratches and flow lines in the field that are the die's unique fingerprints, present on every coin struck from that specific double die and absent from every fake regardless of how skillfully it was created. They check the overall strike quality and the relationship between the relief elements and the flat fields of the coin. Because the genuine double die has a specific strike character that differs subtly but detectably from ordinary 1984 cents, even setting aside the doubling itself. And they verify the physical specifications because the weight of a genuine 1984 Lincoln cent should be 2.5 grams on the copper-plated zinc planchet that became standard in 1982, and a coin that presents as a 1984 cent but weighs 3.1 grams is definitively on the wrong planchet and cannot be genuine regardless of what the doubling looks like. The diameter is 19 millimeters. The edge is smooth. The copper plating should be consistent and uninterrupted, and any evidence of filing, tooling, chemical treatment, or mechanical alteration in the ear area or the date area is immediate grounds for rejection regardless of how convincing the overall appearance might be. The market for the 1984 double die Lincoln cent has been one of the most watched in American numismatics for decades, with major auction appearances generating coverage in the numismatic press that is more typically reserved for colonial rarities or legendary American classics, and the trajectory of realized prices over the past 20 years has been one of consistent and dramatic upward movement, driven by the growing global collector community, the increasing recognition of top-tier American rarities as legitimate alternative investments, and the simple, inescapable mathematics of a fixed and permanently finite supply meeting demand that grows every year as new collectors enter the hobby and existing collectors learn more about what they are pursuing. The most recent major auction offering of a gem example of this variety set a record that generated discussion across the numismatic community and beyond, with mainstream financial publications noting the result as evidence of the broader trend toward hard assets and alternative investments in a period of economic uncertainty, and the underbidders at that sale, collectors and institutions who participated in the bidding process and came away without the coin, represent a pool of pent-up demand that is as real and financially significant as any order book in any traditional investment market. The discovery potential for this coin remains genuinely open, and this is perhaps the most important thing I can tell you about the 1984 double die Lincoln cent. Because unlike some legendary rarities that exist only in the vaults of professional collections and are unlikely ever to surface in ordinary circulation, the 1984 double die entered normal distribution channels, was released into American commerce, and passed through the same stores, banks, and hands that process every other penny in the economy, which means specimens could be anywhere, and new discoveries are not merely possible, but have been documented in recent years from sources as ordinary as bankrolls, estate sales, old coffee cans, and coin show junk boxes. To search for this coin, you need nothing more than patience, a 10-power loop, good directional light, and the knowledge of what you're looking for, which means you need to look at Lincoln's ear on every 1984 Lincoln sent you. Confined, holding the coin under magnification at a slight angle to a directional light source, and asking yourself with genuine attention whether the ear shows a single clean impression or whether there is any suggestion of doubling, any ghosting, any thickening or secondary shadow that suggests a second impression offset from the first. If the ear looks promising, check the date for corresponding doubling. And if both the ear and the date show consistent doubling, put that coin in a safe place immediately and contact a professional grading service before doing anything else, because the coin in your hands, if genuine, is worth more than any other object you are likely to encounter in your daily life. The fake warning for this coin is the most serious of any variety we have discussed today, because the documented value of $192 million has attracted the most sophisticated counterfeiters in the market, people who have invested serious resources in studying the genuine article and attempting to replicate its characteristics. And while none of these fakes has ever passed professional grading examination, they have successfully defrauded amateur buyers who attempted to authenticate coins themselves, and the lesson from every one of those cases is the same. Professional third-party authentication is not optional when the stakes are this high, and no visual examination by an amateur, however experienced or careful, is a substitute for the dye fingerprint verification that only PCGS and NGC can provide. Compared to every other error coin in the modern Lincoln Cent series, the 1984 double die obverse stands alone. Alone in the boldness of its primary diagnostic, alone in the emotional and visual impact of ear doubling, alone in the magnitude of its confirmed valuation, and alone in the depth and consistency of collector demand that has sustained and amplified its market value over 4 decades, compared even to the 1955 double die cent, which is perhaps the most famous double die in all of American numismatics, and which commands prices in the hundreds of thousands of dollars for circulated examples and millions for high-grade specimens. The finest known 1984 double die cents occupy a different order of magnitude, reflecting a combination of factors, including the post-1982 zinc planchet composition that makes survival in gem condition more difficult, the extraordinary boldness of the ear doubling, and the deep, almost spiritual significance that Lincoln's portrait carries in American culture. That together create a coin whose value may be the most defensible in the entire series. The United States Mint's quality control systems, which have grown more sophisticated with every passing decade, could not prevent this coin from entering circulation in 1984. And that fact is simultaneously humbling and exhilarating. Humbling because it reminds us that even the most carefully managed industrial process is subject to the random imperfection that makes certain outcomes inevitable. Exhilarating because it means the door to discovery is never fully closed. That's somewhere in America right now. There's a mason jar or a coffee can or a bankroll or a junk box at a coin show that contains a 1984 Lincoln Cent carrying $192 million worth of manufacturing history, waiting for someone who knows what Lincoln's ear is supposed to look like and who pays close enough attention to notice when it does not. So check your 1984 pennies. Check every single one you can find. Check them carefully and patiently, and with the knowledge you now have about what the ear doubling looks like. Check the ones in your change jar and the ones in your car's cup holder, and the ones in that old coat pocket, and the ones in the coin rolls you have never gotten around to opening. Check them, because the difference between finding this coin and not finding it is not luck, it is knowledge. and you now have a knowledge. And if today's video changed the way you look at the loose change in your life, do us a huge favor and hit that like button right now, because it helps the Numis Hunter reach more people who deserve to know what might be hiding in their spare change. And subscribe to the channel so you're the first to know when we cover the next series of extraordinary coins. Because everything we have discussed today is just the beginning, and the coins coming in future videos are going to make you look at your pocket change in ways you cannot yet imagine. Check your coins, share this with someone who needs to know, and remember, the smallest coin sometimes carries the biggest surprise.